Good morning to you. How are you this morning? Are you surviving the mosquitoes? There's been a question from the audience, Ross. What do we do with mozzies? Eat less bananas? I don't know. Let me give him the microphone.
No, this is actually fascinating. So apart from the fact that I don't know how many people have we got here? 3,500 or so? 2,100. Okay, so we've got 2,100 people, and if everybody killed 10 mosquitoes, we've got 21,000 gone at least. So, that's a good start. The other one that I have heard, and this is particularly for people, we worked in Africa for a while, but one of the surgeons was adamant that if you had high levels of B1, you were less attractive to the mosquitoes. Okay, so there we go. Somebody who's saying that it works. So vitamin B1, just pop down to the pharmacy anywhere and grab some vitamin B1. You can't really overdose on B1, so you're okay taking a fair amount. Look, as far as the plant, you probably won't get high enough concentrations, but lots of grains will have B1 in them.
Like a walking textbook. Ross, we appreciate you. Thank you for speaking to us this week. Did you notice that we chose to have the lifestyle medicine workshop in the furthest tent away on site? So because we're talking about the Adventist health message and lifestyle medicine and the laws of health, we thought we'd choose the young adults tent to make you walk a very long distance to get here. This morning we are talking about physical activity. Yesterday, if you were inundated with terms that were unfamiliar to you, there is a great quote by Michael Pollan. You may be familiar with it. Eat food. Not too much, mostly plants. It's a good takeaway from yesterday. A Bible verse to start us off with this morning, 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Train yourself to be godly. Physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Aaron. Oh, no. All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. Yeah, it's going to be the warmest day of the week, I think. So great time to be sitting underneath a tent close to lunchtime. An introduction. The healthcare system is struggling to keep up with the level of disease and disability within our community. We've probably had some contributions to that, even in some of the way we've handled healthcare issues in recent years. And we talked yesterday about some of the things in terms of nutrition, and nutrition is particularly important, of course, in order to give the body what it needs. But there's another really important part, and that is the physical activity side of things. You actually need to use it, and it is a really true, the truism is, if you don't use it, you do lose it. Now, it even goes beyond that, because while when we get older, it is true, and we can see ourselves, in a sense, losing muscle mass and things like that. But when you're younger, if you don't do something about or increase your physical activity or have actually adequate physical activity when you're young, you're actually starting from a pretty low base. So that when you come to lose it, you don't have much to lose. Does that make sense? And what we're finding now, and I know I have a young nephew who spends most of his time, he's on the autistic spectrum, but I suspect there may be some oppositional defiance maybe taking over some of the ADD. But in any case, he literally spends about 12 hours a day just playing computer games. Really hard to get him away from it. And his parents try, and his dad ultimately, once he unlocks the door after much abuse, takes him out and they go for at least a cycle around the neighbourhood once a day. And if they can't do that, if the mum's the only one home, well, he's made at least to walk around the house once a day. Now, for a 14-year-old, that's not very much. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on when it comes to what science is actually telling us that is necessary in order for us to build and maintain the physical or level of physical fitness that we need. And this is it's not for an aesthetic reason. It's really about health, and not only just health of the body, but also health of the brain. We're going to finish off with the health of the brain. So physical activity, I can tell you straight up front, reduces stress. And I'll give you the mechanism for that just shortly. It improves mental health. You actually do feel happier. Now, having said that, does anybody know why you would feel happier once you've done a certain amount of exercise? Yeah, everybody knows the term endorphins. And you have to do, as long as you're doing moderate to moderately severe exercise, you will actually get that little endorphin hit. And that's something that is almost universal. However, does anybody remember Barry O'Farrell? Yeah. So Barry was New South Wales Premier some years ago, and it was interesting. There was a fun run at the hospital, and I was tasked with walking Barry around. And it was interesting just having a chat with him. In fact, no, it was the health minister that I was walking around, but I just managed to have a chat with Barry beforehand. And he won't mind me saying this, but at school they called him Fatty O'Barrel. Now, he lost a lot of weight and he did a lot of work in order to get himself into shape as Premier, and partway through his premiership actually. And huge amount of respect for what he did with that. And as we were discussing that, he said, but did you know, he says, I don't actually get that little endorphin hit. So some people actually get benefit from doing the exercise and they get the little endorphin hit. It's like, great. And some people do it for psychological reasons and possibly do too much of it, but they keep going for that endorphin hit. But he actually didn't do it. So he was actually pushing through and he lost a lot of weight. He was actually in good condition, apart from that stray bottle of wine that he ended up with, which probably didn't help his waistline. But in any case, it's interesting that there are the rare person where that doesn't happen. But for the vast majority of us, we do actually feel happier as a result. It actually increases our self-esteem and confidence, and we'll look at that a little bit more later, young people as well as older people. And there's reasons why exercise and physical activity does that. Strengthens bones and muscles, we know. I mean, improves what's called kinesthetic performance. It's just that your body needs to keep doing stuff in order for it to remember that's how you do stuff. Does that make sense? Kinesthetic is just movement, and it's just movement and the body knowing where the arms and legs are. If you stop using those, and when I had a back accident a number of years ago, I think I mentioned it head first into the bottom of a creek, but I couldn't really move for about 3 weeks, or 3 months actually, mostly, in a brace. And I was desperate to move, but it was interesting that the only thing that I could do was get on a stationary cycle, which I would get on, slowly move the legs. But it was just interesting how the body had lost a lot of its ability to move, both through loss of muscle and you also lose some of the connections in the nervous system. So you get better at sport and doing everyday activities. That just makes sense. Helps to manage weight, of course, and that's one thing that we all know, and reduces the risk of several diseases, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and some cancers. And I'll talk more about that later on. But that's pretty much an overview. And if you didn't need to get anything else, you could probably leave at this stage. That's what exercise does. But particularly when we get to the end, and you have to stay to the end, in order to hear it, you can go beforehand. But in any case, we'll talk about how much exercise do you need. And it's a little bit like the foods. Most people are not getting enough exercise, even when they actually do stuff on a regular basis. So we've got to be careful. And it slows the aging process. I'll talk more about that as we go on. And improves brain function again. I'll do that at the end. So okay. So what happens in your brain when you're stressed? So one of the things I said, when you exercise, it actually helps to reduce stress. Now, there's some excellent programs going on, and in the women's tent I know Jennifer Skews, the psychologist, is giving a lot of good information in relation to handling stress and the mental side of things. But exercise is actually an excellent way of being able to handle and work with stress. So you've got a little part in the brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala really works on, it's kind of like, it's there to detect danger, even anticipated danger. So it'll fire off pretty much. I mean, you know, some people have lower threshold than others, but in any case, it's the amygdala that kind of fires off. Sends some signals through to the frontal lobes, particularly prefrontal cortex, and that prefrontal cortex, different parts of it, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex does a lot of this, but it starts to actually then review whether or not that information, should I act on it or should I not? Now we can feel a little bit and then we go, oh, you know, for those of us that might surf, you might see nice big wave coming and you're going, am I in the right time or am I taking off a little too late? Sometimes the amygdala doesn't fire early enough and you end up in a lot of trouble. But the point is, that's the amygdala that we go, okay, you should take that or you shouldn't. And we all know people who, take more risks than others, don't we? Yeah, well, it's possible that their amygdala isn't firing in quite the same way as most of us. You know, if you're a base jumper, you know those people that sort of jump off with the suits? Yeah, they don't have a very functional amygdala. In fact, it's been recognised it's relatively small. Most of us do, but it's the frontal lobes that actually we need to have there to help control us. Interestingly enough, if you take caffeine, so I say nothing about coffee or tea or anything like that, I'm just saying about caffeine. So anything that might have caffeine in it, caffeine actually reduces blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. And we can actually show that you'll actually reduce prefrontal cortex activity when you have a coffee. Oh, sorry, I said a coffee. I meant anything with caffeine in it. So you can have coffee as long as it doesn't have caffeine in it. All right, so that's the prefrontal cortex. So then we go from there, and from the central nervous system, it'll actually stimulate a little gland above the kidney called the adrenal gland, and you'll get things like adrenaline, noradrenaline produced from there. You also get the hypothalamus firing off, and this is where you get some hormones, the corticotrophin-releasing hormone. You don't need to remember the names. And then the ACTH, which is adrenocorticotrophic hormone, and that produces the cortisol. So we all know about cortisol and stress, right? It's not the only stress hormone. As I said, you've got particularly things like noradrenaline and adrenaline, which will go off as well, and they do their own damage. But the cortisol is more of the long-term one. In order to shut that down, so that's what we call the HPA axis. I've just shown you that. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. We just call it the HPA axis. There's the three of them, boom, and cortisol, noradrenaline, etc. The reason why I want to show you that is because there's feedback. When the cortisol goes up, it feeds back to the pituitary and to the hypothalamus, telling them to slow down. Trouble is when you keep activating it through the amygdala, frontal lobe, allowing that to go ahead, and you're going, yep, we should be stressed, yep, this is something to be worried about. It's interesting that the thing that actually slows that down, and remember that that's probably going on for most of us for a lot of the day. Different stresses, different things will cause us stress and anxiety, and we talk more about that on Friday actually. But exercise actually increases that via feedback. So exercise is a great way of resetting the HPA axis. If you do exercise to at least a modest to moderately severe level, I'm just trying to click from here. It's thinking. You're stuck. Anyway. Yeah, more exercise, less feeling stressed. We get the point. But that's actually how it works. All right. Effectiveness of physical activity interventions for improving depression, anxiety, and distress. And this is all part of that being driven within that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So, conclusions, physical activity, highly beneficial for improving symptoms. I mean, this is a 2023 paper. Yes, in anxiety, depression, wide range of adult populations, including the general population and people with diagnosed mental illness. Now, there's a lot of lip service given to it, and we've talked a little bit, and certainly we've had a talk with Jennifer Skews about some of this. I think we need to do better in terms of the way we facilitate in our lifestyle medicine offerings rather than just talking. But by God's grace, and if you've got a spare minute in your prayer lives, let's pray for that so that we have some genuine programs that do work. Well, not just programs, I would say a facility. Sand would have been a great place, but it's probably not so much anymore. So general population, people with diagnosed mental illness, people with chronic disease, all of that works beautifully. Physical activity, the right kind of physical activity. How does it affect self-esteem? No question that it does. Intervention of physical activity alone is associated with an increase in self-concept and self-worth in children and adolescents. Now, there's a reason for that. There's a friend of mine, in fact, here at one of the local gyms, actually runs one of the local gyms, and takes some of the more, what would you say, socially disadvantaged children, number of them male, not only male, with behavioural problems. And they do an exercise class a couple of times a week. And it's fascinating just listening to him, and he's particularly good with working with them, but working with those boys and girls and seeing them, first, it's hard for them to sort of get out of bed. They're lucky to come to school, but they know that they can't come to this program unless they come to school. And they love coming to this program. It actually improves their self-efficacy because they get to do things, and you should see the way they try and do some of the exercises. It's pretty amazing for watching young people so uncoordinated. But they get better and better at it, and it improves their ability to do things. It improves their self. They look going, oh, gee, I can do it. Oh, yeah, I can work really hard. And obviously getting a lot of support and positive by the personal trainer who's there as well. Certainly does increase. And I'm sure that there's a number of other things, as well as reducing some of their stress, but it increases their self-concept and their self-worth. Well recognised now. Programs on depressive symptoms, quality of life in older people. So depression, while we know that it peaks particularly amongst adolescent to early 20s females in its highest, it also goes up for both males and females as people get older, particularly after 65. Exercise therapy in older people was effective, as evidenced by a decrease in depressive symptoms and improvements in quality of life. Changes were significant statistically, as you'd expect. Exercise programs in older people are effective at improving depressive symptoms and self-esteem. Again, when people spend a lot of their, and I guess you'd be the same as me, we get up in the morning, we sit at the breakfast table, we take a few steps to the car, sit in the car. If you're in Sydney, you'll drive for about 2 hours to get to work. That's about 15 kilometres. And then you'll be, as I said to my brother once, I phoned him on the way home, and he says, what are you doing? And I asked him what he was doing, and he was sitting on his back porch. He lives in Queensland. Sitting on his back porch looking at the sunset. And I said, oh, that sounds terrific. He says, what are you doing? He says, I'm just sitting here in a beautiful, comfortable leather chair. I'm also looking at the sunset. And he said, wow, that's great. I said, yeah, there's a few cars around me, but we get to sit here for about half an hour, so I may as well enjoy it. Nice music playing, air conditioning, anyway. So particularly through a lot of our lives, the way most of our life is actually done sedentary. And then we get out of the car, and then we walk to the desk, and we sit at the desk, and then we get stressed over what we're seeing there the whole day, and then we get up at the end of that, if we're lucky, and then back into the car another 2 hours, and you're back home. And then, of course, not much time for exercise. So it's not surprising that our capacity to do physical activity decreases, and not surprising that physically we become, well, not only just physically less capable, but mentally more depressed. So exercise programs in older people are effective at improving depressive symptoms. And it's not something that we can go into here, but the types of exercise that you might at least start initially will be different as you get older and depending on how much activity that you've done. But it can be done by everybody, and even people with significant comorbidities, so other health issues. It certainly can be put into a program that can be effective. So I'm just wondering. Yep, there we go. This was just physical activity strengthens bones and muscles. Now, dairy formed a part of this, but the key thing is that high physical activity, and they're saying as long as you've got the nutrition there behind it, doesn't have to come from dairy, but certainly that's a place to get things like calcium and protein, and vitamin D, in fact. It does affect the mineralisation of young people. So if young people, as they're growing, are not getting the physical activity, the demands on the physical body, both muscular as well as actually the tines, both the tendons as well as the bones themselves, they don't develop in the same way. So it's really important. Now, you can stress a young developing bone and muscle by putting too much pressure on it as well, as some people have done. But we're not talking about that. We're actually just talking about young people doing physical activity, requiring them to move and lift strength, all that type of stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about things like plyometrics. But do you know how much a young person is recommended that they should be doing every day? Yeah, an hour. At least an hour of outdoor activity of either moderate or significantly high physical activity. Not sure why we're not getting these. Okay, so high physical activity, optimal eating habits, okay, for bones and health. All right, physical activity strengthens bones and muscles in adolescence, plyometric exercises. So plyometric exercises are these ones where essentially you're using the body weight, but you're doing a lot of jumping. So basketball's a great activity for plyometrics. Football to a lot of stuff is as well, because you're actually doing a lot of change in direction, and so you're actually forcing the body to change in direction, and so it's pushing the body, making it force itself in multiple different ways. Basically the things that, and I'm talking about to the middle-aged and older people, that you would have done a lot of when you were growing up. But there is certainly an epidemic of people who are not doing much at all across all generations, and it is more concerning amongst the young. So jumping interventions during childhood and adolescence improve bone mineral content, density in structural populations without side effects. I mean, of course, no side effects, except for the occasional broken bone. Now, it's great when you see some of these jumping, the trampolines, because they got sides on them, and the kids really can't hurt themselves unless they sort of come down head first, which they've got a fair bit of flexibility within the bones still at that point. But, the old ones, of course, you do it wrong and you end up between the springs and on the frame in the old days, so you break a few things. But yeah, they actually work very well. So reducing the risk of things like osteoporosis and bone diseases later on in life. So important to get that young. All right, bones in much older people. I mean, these are pretty obvious for us. This is just from the Vic Health. Exercise makes bones stronger and helps slow the rate of bone loss. It absolutely does. And in terms of slowing the rate of bone loss, and I won't talk about some of the medications and the way they work, and some people possibly need to take those on, particularly if they have autoimmune-associated destruction and degeneration of the bones. But certainly being physically active at every age, and certainly as you get older, to prevent that bone loss works very well. Now, nutrition is an extremely important part of it. If you're not maintaining adequate nutrition, and that is, yes, vitamin K, calcium, vitamin D, if you're not getting all of those in there, then potentially you're not going to have the success that you need. But keeping that in mind, even if you're having all of those, you still need to actually make the body work. So older people can increase muscle mass and strength through muscle strength training activities. I'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but a lot of people tend to think that, gee, I need to do more exercise. And what immediately they're thinking, okay, walking, and walking is good. Walking fast is good. Walking fast up a hill is even better. And a lot of people will think, well, maybe jogging is even better than that. Now, some people are set up for jogging. Personally, I was always a sprinter at school. My mind tends to wander dramatically when I'm sort of doing this jog, and it's kind of like, so really? So why are we jogging again? Was this fun? And I've got to find different ways. Like high-intensity interval training is something that probably I match with a whole lot better. Other people are set up for jogging. They love jogging. I have a colleague who could step out the door this morning and go for a 15-kilometre run. Wouldn't have any problem at all. I occasionally run 5 kilometres with them. She's a female and loves the fact that she can beat me very easily. But look, that's over to some people. Some people probably aren't kinesthetically set up for jogging. You know, I see some people, and they've obviously been told that they need to do more exercise or are convicted for it, which is good. But you watch them jogging down the road and you're just thinking, I don't think that's the exercise for you. There are a lot of different exercises that you can do. Cycling's great. Swimming is great. Not the same level of weight bearing in swimming, but you certainly still can get a lot of improvements, and certainly aerobic improvements you get from swimming. But we could talk more about that later if you wanted. But lots of different exercises, and there's some great places, either searching for it on the internet or going and getting yourself booked in with a PT somewhere, and they can help you. Balance and coordination exercises. Now, they say Tai Chi. I have no problem with, the slow calisthenic movements. I actually like them. I like those kind of things. The only thing I don't like with things like Tai Chi and Qigong and yoga and things like that is because the orientation of those does actually have a strong Eastern connection. And depending on the person who's presenting it, there will often be a strong overtone with that. And I remember once being invited by a group on campus, actually for myself, not only to be involved with some research that they wanted to do in Qigong, and I spoke with the Qigong master for some time. And as I said, I have no problem with the actual movements in a lot of the ways, or that style of movement, but being involved in something which has a strong hereditary link to all of that just makes me a little bit suspect. So Pilates, great. Work out your own kind of, down dog and up monkey, or however you want to do it. They would work really well. I'll just make one other quick comment. Do you all know, so yoga was initiated by the yogis, right? So the yogis were the holy men. And do you know who the yogis worshipped? So they're doing the yoga, developing these techniques in order that they could get closer to, does anybody know who the god was? No, it was actually Shiva. So Shiva, and in the Hindu structure of the gods, Shiva is the god of darkness, the god of chaos. So again, I think it's just something that, I personally just take it on with and I'm thinking, well, if kind of the god of darkness is keen for them to do this kind of thing, maybe I need to rethink whether or not that's something I should personally be involved with. But I know that's a personal decision. But shoelaces up, standing on one leg, and do it every day. It's all good for you. I should say, do that if you've got reasonable balance to start with. If you don't, start on something a little bit, walking a straight line might be a place to start. All right. So weight-bearing exercise, we've talked about that, such as walking, but also weight training. So it's not just doing the aerobic, it is actually doing weight-bearing. So weight training is actually quite helpful, and we probably should do more of it. Not because I'm trying to push you into a gym, but because you, and you can get them yourself, you can buy the weights yourself, but doing weight training is actually something that the body actually does need to do. Having said that, if you are going to choose to do it, I would suggest that you get a little bit of a professional help in terms of designing your program to begin with, because it needs to be a balanced program. Some people just go, oh no, I can do weights, particularly the guys who grew up in the 70s. We've seen Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I just get some dumbbells, and I just work away. And unfortunately, what you will end up doing most likely is developing, yes, some muscle relative to others. You need to do a balanced program so that you're not putting yourself, and particularly as you get older, out of balance, developing some muscles, not others, and therefore causing stretch, and you'll end up with an injury. And then, of course, you've got an injury and you can't do it, and so, gee, well, there I am. I can't do it. And I wouldn't like to see you go that way. So does it make sense? Just suggesting it's not that expensive, it's worth it, just getting a good program done. So older people who exercise in water, it's not weight bearing, still experience some muscle moan because you're actually still using muscles. And water is a great place to start for people with different injuries, particularly if they've got some spinal injuries, knee injuries. But there is not here. We would play squash, and for those of you that might know my brother Andrew, he takes about 10 minutes to stretch before we start playing his game. And then, of course, he takes his shirt off, which not sure exactly why that fits in. But in any case, he's always done a lot of stretching, whereas I've always just jumped straight in and gone and played. Now, I've just taken, and I'm talking to myself a lot more seriously these days, because I actually found that I do actually get a lot better, particularly if I can stretch out things like hips and that sort of thing if I'm surfing or something like that, because I'm finding I'm getting tighter in the hamstrings, certainly tighter in a lot of the muscles around the hips and that kind of thing. And stretching is a really important thing in order for the body to maintain its suppleness and prevent injury and also improve performance. And as you get older, you do need to stretch more. So if you're sitting down on the in the living room somewhere, even if it was just conversation or some other sort of media that you're watching, it's a great time to actually do some stretching exercises. Really quick tip, you shouldn't be stretching to the point where you're actually hurting yourself. I don't have to go very far to get that. So you stretch to that point to it, so you're just putting a little bit of pressure on, hold it for about 40 seconds, and then come off. And then do it again, hold it for about 40 seconds, come off. You only need to do 2 per muscle group. That's as a minimum. You can go longer if you like. Does that make sense? You can do arms, shoulders, back, legs. Yeah, okay, so dynamic stretching is a little bit more technical, but dynamic stretching is something that you actually do mostly if you want to get performance. You do that before you do your exercises, whereas the static stretching, what I was just talking about, most of the time you'll do that after you do your exercises. Having said that though, if you just stretch, it'll be okay. It does, so it does reduce performance. Physical activity alone in this particular study was generally small, and it is true. Although, yeah, if you do some high intensity activity for about an hour a day, you probably will lose some weight. But really the key thing is linking up the exercise with the nutritional shift. Does that make sense? It is doing both. So exercise. Now, when they talk about weight, one of the problems is when people go onto an exercise regimen, they don't realise that they're actually moving some of the storage element that they had before, and they're actually building some of the functional element, which is the muscle. Now, muscle is actually denser than fat and actually weighs a bit more. So you might not actually be losing so much weight, but you're actually gaining muscle. This is a little plug shortly. I'm going to offer by the end of it for you to be involved in a study that we're doing, and this is the NAD study. And we will actually measure we'll estimate, but we'll do a measurement for percent body fat, percent fat mass, that type of thing, muscle mass. So you can get a handle on how that is going. But yes, sometimes, all the time, when you're actually doing exercise, you actually do put on more muscle, which means that you might not be losing weight as such, but you are actually gaining muscle but losing fat. So it's a good idea to do some of those tests, as I mentioned. But diet and exercise. So regular exercise without weight loss, you can reduce visceral fat, but the best thing is to do diet and physical activity combined. And that would just make sense. I mean, this is not rocket science for most of you here. But a lot of people will try and just do the exercise, but physical activity alone, less effective. You combine it with diet and exercise, very effective. It comes off and it stays off. All right, so changing your life can begin the weight loss, but combining it with exercise keeps it down and keeps it going down if you want to go in that direction. And exercise alone is not effective. You can't out-exercise a bad diet. That was Anthony Balduzzi, and I think he's absolutely right. A lot of people will try and compensate, and I know a number of years ago we had a talk about exercise versus diet here on campus as well. So reduced risk of disease. Most of these, physical inactivity responsible for 10 to 20% of the burden of related disease. 13% of the disease burden could be reduced if everyone did an extra 15 minutes brisk walking. Just adding 15 minutes. And I think that's one of the key things with any of this sort of additional exercise component or any of the lifestyle habit modifications. You probably can't do everything all at once, but just do something. And for those of you who have listened to any of Jordan Peterson, the now very popular psychologist, he makes the comment, he says, you don't have to do more than just be better than you were yesterday. Don't compare yourself with anybody else. Just do something so that today you're doing something a little bit better than what you did yesterday. Does that make sense? So if you can only get out and walk 10 minutes, well, walk 10 minutes. Maybe tomorrow it'll be 15, and then add to that. Maybe you'll have one less snack on the next day. Disease particularly linked to physical inactivity, and we know these, includes diabetes. Why diabetes? Because diabetes is having too much energy coming into the system that the body can no longer deal with. When you exercise, when you move, the body has to do something with it, and it's giving it an outlet. So it makes sense. Less diabetes. In fact, you can get excellent results with diabetes without even losing weight. Bowel cancer, and I could talk more about that later on. Also uterine cancer. Dementia, I'm going to talk about that coming up. Breast cancer, coronary heart disease. I mean, we touched on some of this yesterday in any case. Stroke. So there's a lot of reasons why it's a good idea to exercise. And if you can't do anything else, exercise is a great place to start. I'm not sure that I need to cover that in any great detail, but it does protect against the age-related diseases, and I've pretty much covered that. Type 2 diabetes, yes, people with type 2 diabetes should engage in physical activity regularly, reduce the sedentary time, breaking up sitting time. Any activities undertaken with acute and chronic health complications related to diabetes may require accommodations to ensure safe and effective participation. That's true. So, yeah, 44% reduction in diabetes incidence, even when they didn't make their weight loss goal. So there was a weight loss goal, but even without that, and that makes sense. You can actually be bigger than you need to be, but if you're not bringing more energy into the system, yes, the body's going to be using some of that stored energy, but at the same time, if you're doing physical activity, the body is going to go, oh, actually, I do need more energy. I do need more of that, food that you've been eating. I'm using it all up. That actually will reduce your increase in your blood sugar, which is really what diabetes is. Also gestational diabetes, and of course there's a strong link between gestational. So this is women who have developed diabetes during pregnancy. And it is a high risk not only for the development of later diabetes for those women, but also has significant risks for the baby, larger baby, all sorts of other things that are associated with it. But gestational diabetes, again, being able to move, will certainly, so in this case concluded that prenatal exercise alone, including 140 minutes of moderate intensive exercise weekly. So if you divide that by 7, that's only 20 minutes a day. Moderate intensity for a pregnant mum. So moderate intensity, I mean, she's already carrying a bit of a burden. But if she's doing a brisk walk around the road and possibly up 1 or 2 hills, that'd be moderate intensive activity. So thus moderate to high intensity exercise done 4 to 5 days a week appears to reduce abdominal, but particularly visceral fat, so the fat that's sitting around the tissue in adults with type 2 diabetes, and may lower their metabolic risk. All right, this idea of oxidative stress and inflammation and what we call vascular aging, there's no doubt about it. So oxidative stress is essentially what is the primary cause for the damage to tissue, and that actually does age you. And exercising significantly reduces that. It does it in a number of different ways, so let me not bore you with the detail. But essentially, as I mentioned in one of the other talks, when you're exercising, you actually do produce a lot of free radicals. But then the body responds to that, so you'll exercise for an hour. The body then responds to that by producing lots and lots of antioxidants, so it increases its antioxidant system, like glutathione peroxidase, superoxide dismutase, catalase, thioredoxin, just a whole bunch of things. And that then protects you for the 23 hours that you're not exercising, because they go up. So your antioxidant capacity overall, or the body's ability to handle lots of free radicals, goes up as a result of exercising. So you do stress yourself during exercise, but it actually improves it significantly. Skeletal muscle abnormalities responsible for significant disability, the thing what we call sarcopenia, so it's actually losing muscle mass as you get older, and reduced physical activity, hormonal changes, insulin resistance, those people who are developing diabetes. There can be some genetic susceptibility. All of these play into that loss of muscle mass, and what we would call ultimately, and you might have heard the term frailty, or people tracking towards frail. Nutrition can do it. Chronic pain will do it. Any sort of chronic inflammatory activity in the body will actually push people and track them towards frailty. But the good thing is that physical exercise is an effective way of being able to circumvent that. So again, physical exercise, and choose something that you enjoy. Like I said, jogging is not my thing, not really. I mean, I can jog 5Ks, wow. But it's not really my thing. But there are lots of other physical activity. I like being physically active, so I like playing squash, I like surfing, I like doing things that are a little bit more explosive in that nature. Choose something that you enjoy. And choose, particularly if you like enjoying doing it with somebody else. There was 2 ladies I remember, we went to the gym the other day, and it was just fascinating to watch. I mean, we're working out in a different part of the gym, but I noticed that these 2 ladies who got together, they were obviously there just as an opportunity to catch up and talk, because they didn't stop talking the whole time. They on treadmills beside each other, just chatting away, and like we're still there an hour later, and they're chatting, and still didn't stop. But the point was that they were exercising at the same time. And what a great way of doing it, whether it's on the treadmill or whether you're walking, and they probably could have walked to Newcastle from here. But, you know, I mean, it was just what a great opportunity for them to engage and get some physical activity happening at the same time. I'll just say, when I was a young, and I've got my sister here, it was her horse to begin with, but she didn't want it anymore, so she gave it to me. It was unfortunately a psychologically damaged animal. And its whole purpose was to make sure you got off. And I was a kid of around about 9 or 10. And I got a lot of exercise, first of all trying to catch the horse, because it was interesting. So I'd have a little bit of bread, and so the horse kind of likes you up until that point. But then if it managed to get the bread, it'll swing around, try and kick the daylights out of you. And if it doesn't do that, she'll come and actually charge you. I wasn't very big. So, you know, I'd bolt for the nearest tree, sort of duck around it, and then I'm figuring, well, I'm not going to let her win on that. So I would need to sort of try and come back and chase it, and then she'd be off around the paddock. You know, like it's about a 30-acre paddock. And so I'm bolting across to try and cut her off, and then she'd shoot over there. I got a lot of exercise running, and that may be one of the reasons why, as a sprinter, I did okay. Yeah, anyway. Effective exercise on cellular and tissue aging. The natural aging process, I know there's lots of things that go on during that, but you do end up with a functional decline in the cells and tissues. So exercise has shown anti-aging effects by extending lifespan, health span, through decreasing the 9 hallmarks of aging and age-associated inflammation. It absolutely does. And as long as you're not overdoing it. Now, there are people with issues, and I think psychologically, and we do see them, where they are actually over-exercising. Now, there are conditions for that. You can over-exercise, but for the vast majority of us, that's never going to be a danger. We just need to do some more. There's also this suggestion that AMPK is a central regulator. Yeah. Now, what is AMPK? This is one of the reasons, and for those people who know about the drug metformin, so metformin is one of the most popularly prescribed drugs now for people with type 2 diabetes. And it's interesting that metformin, while it still does have side effects, but what it is actually what we call a mitochondrial poison. It's actually poisoning the part of the body that's actually, the part of the cell that's actually trying to produce the ATP. But lots of people get excited over the fact that it increases that AMP kinase, which is adenosine monophosphate kinase. It's actually an enzyme that actually makes or uses adenosine monophosphate and try and make more, add more phosphates. But the point is that when you generate AMPK, because you've used up ATP, so in other words, you're using up adenosine triphosphate. AMP is adenosine monophosphate, all right, just has one. So with the biochemistry when you get there. So being in an AMPK positive state, that gets activated when you've got lots of AMP. And you do that by exercising and not eating, or not eating too much when you exercise. Does that make sense? So you get into that And that's why fasting can be a very good thing. I haven't talked about that in any of the talks. Maybe we can cover it later. So especially relevant to people with type 2 diabetes for reasons that I've talked to before, because type 2 diabetes, when you have that, you have accelerated cellular aging. It does actually age you faster. So physical activity restores brain blood. Oh, so now actually we're just running onto the brain. So what about the brain? It helps to restore brain blood flow. There's no question about that. One of the problems with people as they get older, it tends to have a reduction in blood flow. There are some ischemic effects that can potentially happen. It increases antioxidant capacity, as I mentioned, protects against brain inflammation, promotes brain cell growth, so you actually end up getting new neurons being produced, particularly around the hippocampal region, reduces stress for the reasons that it does, as I mentioned before. So, prevalence dementia in persons with sarcopenia. What was sarcopenia? Muscle wastage. So you're losing your muscles. So you're more likely to get dementia if you have significant muscle loss as you get older. Approximately 3 times higher. 3 times higher. That's 300% higher in people who have more sarcopenia. Now, there's a test that we can even do. You've all done the grip strength test? Yeah. And that's actually a really good way of being able to assess whether somebody is more at risk of dementia, just their grip strength. So if we can get, and the major study that we're actually doing this year, we've just had ethics approval, first in the world to get it, what we call a multimodal study for people with mild cognitive impairment. So people who actually are on that track, and 80% of people who have what we call mild cognitive impairment will end up with frank dementia. So we're wanting to stop them going down that path. We are officially recruiting. Anyway. Reduced muscle function is associated with increased risk of incident dementia and faster rate of cognitive decline, as I've just mentioned. So keeping physically healthy is really good for the brain. What do I need to tell you there? Changes in blood flow, fitness for 37 people, yep. Physical training group received supervised aerobic exercise for 3 sessions a week. And what did we end up with? So cognitive gains were manifested in the exercise group, improved immediate and delayed memory performance from, it also shows significant positive association. Okay, so no question, exercising, just increasing blood flow, which also translated to an increase in cognitive function. And that was just exercise. That's without some of the nutritional elements which we know are so important within there. That was just exercise. So habitual exercise maintains, now what do we call the blood-brain barrier? It's all that means is, so the blood flows all around the body, and we know that you get lots of components coming from the blood around the body. Not everything that's flowing around the blood actually makes it into the brain itself. Around every artery that goes into the brain to supply, nutrients, there's a wrap of cells, we call them glial cells, but they're actually wrapped around it. And they're wrapped around it and they don't allow anything through that they don't first vet. That's what the blood-brain barrier is. Now you can damage that. Alcohol damages it. Inflammation of different types damages it. I mentioned advanced glycation end products yesterday. The fried foods, unfortunately, the Maccas. They all actually, advanced glycation end products can damage the blood-brain barrier. So you want to keep the blood-brain barrier, and that's one of the things we know as people get older, it gets more leaky. So habitual exercise helps to maintain that blood-brain barrier. Protects it from lack of oxygen. Now, sleep apnea. All right, this is just in an animal study. So the one on the left, that's just the control. They turned off some oxygen to the brain for the one in the middle, and you can see the blue bit just on the left-hand side there, that's damaged brain tissue. The one on the right there, they exercised them first and then did exactly the same to the one in the middle. And you can see there is still a little blue damage, but it's nowhere near as damaged as the one in the middle. And that was just exercise was able to improve that. So what that means is, if you're a regular exerciser, and then for whatever reason, when you turn 95 or 96, you have a small stroke, you're more likely to survive at that level rather than the one in the middle. Does that make sense? Because you've ended up with a little bit of ischemia and the brain's been able to protect itself. Incidentally, I'll be talking about the NAD study at the end, and if your NAD levels are high, then you have the capacity to repair that a lot more efficiently. At least that's the theory, if you wanted to be in that study. So, Increases intrinsic antioxidant activity. Well, I've covered that, so I'll just run that through fairly quickly. So you get more antioxidant, reduces your inflammatory activity, leads to improved cognition. And there's more to it, and this is what's just coming through here. Just trying to move that on a little bit. There we go. So elevated levels of inflammation. The hippocampus is the part of the brain which is essentially like the brain's librarian. You know, when you go to a library and if you've got somebody nice and active, you'll say, you know, can I get this, particular thing, whatever it might be, and the librarian goes, sure, I will, grabs it, back to you. Well, when your librarian starts getting a little bit older, you know, she's worked there for the last 50 years, and you go, can I have this? And she goes, oh, maybe not. And that's what happens to your brain as you get a little bit older. The hippocampus, the little librarian, if you like, in your brain, is just a little bit tired and slow, and it's going, well, do I know that guy? Oh, that's right, it's my son. It does happen. So elevated levels of inflammation in the hippocampus, so you can damage that more. That's a little librarian, if you like. Been shown to impair memory. Yep, of course we know that. Our brains are primed for inflammation. Don't have time to go into that, but it is true. We're like an aging city. You think of a city when it first is developed, all of it is about development. You know, you've got, building houses, building buildings, all that sort of thing, and roads. And then once it's all established and the trees have grown, then it sort of starts to sort of settle out. That's sort of like middle age. And then after a while, you give it 50, 60 years, and some of those buildings need to be replaced. Some of the pipes under the road need to be sort of relined or whatever it is. And that's what it's like in aging. So that actually as we get older, our body has moved from where we're actually doing mostly what we call anabolism or building up. That was all that development from, teenage years through to, probably around about 30, 35. And then we sort of maintain, and then it's like, oh, the body's spending most of its time now trying to repair. And we could probably call it rest and repair. If you keep doing what you did when you were a teenager and young adult, particularly the way you live, if you keep eating those foods, doing those things, anyway, I've been at some conferences where I just am shocked by what the people are still doing, drinking late at night and whatever. Really? Like, you really don't want to live very well for very long. But you keep doing those, well, you're less able to do it, in the same way that an old car or an old city is less able to handle some of the damage which it sustained. So harming the brain, that inflammation, it increases oxidative damage, reduces the blood-brain barrier integrity. Exercise protects the brain against that inflammatory challenges. So again, exercise, really important again, and I'll show you that it actually does more than that. Physical exercise was effective to reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is part of the immune system that gets switched on when we have inflammation. And improve what's called BDNF. Has anybody heard of BDNF? Yeah, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it is kind of out there. People do know about it, but let's just talk more about it. So it's only one of them. There are other types of neurotrophic factors, but BDNF has been well studied. Exercise has been shown to strongly increase BDNF in the hippocampus. So again, if you like, in where the librarian is. Robust effects of exercise in aged animals in hippocampal neurogenesis, so actually making more neurons and improving even that memory performance. Let me come back very quickly just to the BDNF and caffeine. I'm saying nothing about coffee, nothing about tea. I'm just talking about caffeine. That's very different. So when I talk about caffeine, we actually did a double-blind crossover study where we gave people just a pill. One was a blue pill, one was a green pill, as opposed to a blue and a red. But in any case, we gave them just one of those, and I'd even forgotten which one was which. And it was a crossover study. One had caffeine, one was a placebo. And we actually measured their memory function after caffeine. Now, we knew that memory was associated with BDNF production, particularly post-exercise. What we wanted to do was both look at memory as well as the increase or decrease in BDNF. And part of the theory was we knew that caffeine reduced blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, but we knew that caffeine also blocked what's called adenosine receptors. Now, there's 4 different types. One of those different types is also associated. You have to activate the adenosine receptor in order for you to produce BDNF. So we were arguing that, hey, potentially you might block buy caffeine when you have, your cyclists out there, the middle-aged men in Lycra. It's a great look. That's all right, I've been one of them. And, you cycle out there and then you cycle for about 3 or 4 Ks and there's a cafe, so then you stop and, you sit and have the cafe, whatever you're drinking together, and then off you go again. And the exercise is excellent for stimulating your BDNF. But if you're taking a substance that's going to block one of the receptors that are necessary in order for you to produce BDNF, that'd be a negative thing, wouldn't it? So we wanted to actually test this. As it turned out, we found, and as I said, it was a double-blind crossover, in every post-exercise memory test. And this was done actually by students of mine in the neurosciences. And as I said, they would love to prove me wrong on anything related to caffeine. And in fact, they were laughing at me because they thought, it was so clear between the two groups. And they actually thought that, they're going, see, the caffeine is better for you. I think that is, then I can't remember whether it was blue or green, but anyway, it was one of them. And they really thought that it was the caffeine was actually the better performing one. When we unblinded it, it was exactly the opposite. In fact, in every marker of memory, caffeine performed worse, those on caffeine. And remember, it's the same person. It was a double-blind crossover. It's the same people doing it in both, just 2 weeks gap between them. And but fascinating. Now, we got a little bit stymied when it came to the BDNF because, you get some BDNF which is actually released from some of the white cells peripherally, and we didn't take we didn't take cerebrospinal fluid off these people. So that's still an unknown. The theory is still there. There's no question that it affected memory, and their ability to remember was much worse having taken the caffeine in spite of the exercise and its benefits. We think it still probably is through BDNF. That might be too confusing for you, but in any case, I throw it out there for I'm not sure exactly what. All right, so in any case, exercise increases BDNF, though if you take caffeine it might not. Increased neurogenesis, which is a good thing. Increased cognitive reserve and memory. That's fantastic. We published that too, by the way, so I can give you the paper if you want. What have we got here? Assess the impact of acute physical exercise on associative memory. And I'm just telling you that basically exercise is a good thing. Now we're coming up to the end. Yep. So basically you want to do both. You want to exercise both aerobically as well as doing some strength training. Both of them are important. Let me just take you through sort of guidelines. Adolescents, 60 minutes each day, moderate to vigorous physical activity that makes the heart beat faster. It doesn't have to be a full 60 minutes all at once. You can have several shorter periods. And look, camp time's a great time for it. I see a lot of it around here, and I just think, wow, it'd be great if we were doing more of this in our regular daily lives. At least 3 days a week, children and young people should incorporate vigorous activities and activities that strengthen muscle and bone. So again, some of that. And best between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Ask me why later on. I've only got a minute. All right, adults should be active most days, preferably every day. Each week, adults should do either 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate intensity physical activity. So brisk walk. I don't know whether or not you can actually get moderate activity in golf. Yeah? I've got Scottish background. They developed golf, but I've tried playing. I find it a little bit frustrating. Some of you might be excellent. I know you do a fair bit of walking if you don't have the golf cart. But I don't know whether it ever gets to a brisk walk. Mowing the lawn, yep, great way. Although mowing the lawn for most people on a sort of 400 square block is probably not going to be, that won't take you that long. Swimming is good. Vigorous activity, so jogging, aerobics, fast cycling, soccer, netball, squash would be another one, and any combination of those. So muscle strength training at least 2 days a week. So actually getting, and that's why I do suggest, at least initially, going into a gym, getting somebody to actually put you on a good program that's suitable for you and doing a full body workout. It is very good for you. So best again between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And if you're over 65, 1 hour, 5 days per week, 40 minutes moderate aerobic activity, 20 minutes of strength training at least, and again, around about those times. All right. So just as a quick schema, aerobic activity increases BDNF, improves the blood-brain barrier, enhances brain plasticity. Resistance training, so that's strength training. This is like insulin-like growth factor 1, but a number of other things also enhances brain plasticity. Also improves sex hormone support, so testosterone goes up, things like that. Ladies, if you're interested in that. Also improves BDNF. All right, so we're right on time. I think we don't have any time for questions. One question. No, maybe we don't. Okay. I do want to talk briefly, and it'll be after the program, but for those people who would be interested in being part of what we call our NAD reference range study, we are going to be taking recruits for that. If you're between the ages of 20 and 50, we would love to have you, and if you could see me afterwards, that would be great. Thanks, Erin.
Thanking Ross. Hey. Thank you so much. For those of you who are interested, these sessions are being recorded. They are being uploaded as we speak to the North New South Wales Young Adults Facebook page or Adventist North New South Wales YouTube page. For those that would like to, I'd invite you to come forward to the first 2 or 3 rows. Ross will do a Q&A to the group unmicrophoned so that these guys can go to lunch. They've had workshops all morning. And we do just want to encourage you. Get some more standing breaks, do a few extra steps when you can. Send your work to be printed to a printer on a different level. Do some squats while your microwave lunch is on. But any way that you can improve your physical activity. And